I've never been much of a fan of the popular survival myth of a roll of toilet paper being worth its weight in gold after an economic collapse. I know for a fact that's not the case. The only thing really worth its weight in gold, it's gold. But at the same time, a roll of toilet paper right now in Argentina costs 10 pesos. That's about $1.20, give or take, according to the official value of the peso. At the same time, a roll of nicer toilet paper like this one, like Softy double sheath, this is going to be costing $2 right now in Argentina. Guys, this is Fernando doing another video for the more survivalists. And in case you haven't heard, things are pretty bad over there. In Argentina last week, the peso, the currency, devaluated about 20%, and that's pretty serious. 20% devaluation of your currency, that's pretty bad. And right now, they are seeing the consequence of that turned into inflation. And the kind of inflation they are getting in Argentina, it's pretty serious. Looking at anything from 15, 20, even 30% inflation on certain grocery products. For meat, it's gone up to 50% inflation in terms of beef. And you may be thinking, okay, beef, I would be buying something else. That's not how it works in Argentina. In Argentina, beef is pretty much a staple. That's the common meat for the average people. Even if you go for chicken, poultry, it's usually going along the same inflation as beef, and fish is usually more expensive than either one of those. So you're kind of limited to beef, and if beef and chicken go up in price, that's too bad. You may be thinking, okay, you have fruits, vegetables, but those also are very expensive and are really affected by inflation as well. So as of right now, pretty complicated situation. I'm certainly happy I'm not over there. I'm not there. I do miss my family and friends that stayed there, but I couldn't be happier about not being in Argentina right now and not putting my family through that. It's for you guys that are not used to that sort of stuff. Maybe not many of you have experienced this kind of thing. It is bad. It is, suddenly becoming 30% poorer than you used to be. It's no joke. It's really serious. I thought about sharing with you folks a few of the tips, some of the things people in Argentina are doing right now so as to deal with this situation. Do me a favor and imagine for a second, close your eyes and think about this for a second. If you go to Walmart tomorrow, the day after, you go to Walmart tomorrow and you suddenly see every price that has gone up 30%, how would that impact your life? How would that affect you? It would be very, very bad. So some of the things people in Argentina are doing as of right now, some of these tips are pretty obvious and common, such as the first one: don't go to a grocery store when hungry. When you're hungry, you're mentally geared towards spending more money. If you're hungry when you go to a grocery store, you will probably end up buying more stuff than needed. You will be tempted on buying different things that otherwise you wouldn't be. So that would be one of the first tip. Second would be, don't take the kids. The kids are more likely to throw stuff in the shopping cart, or maybe try to convince you of buying other things that you wouldn't be buying otherwise. Even if you manage to keep your position, it is a little bit harder, and you're going to be a little bit less focused on what you're doing with the kids around, especially if they're trying to buy stuff that it's not planned. That takes us to the following point, which is have a plan, have a list of what it is that you're going to be buying. If you plan this list ahead of time, doing it properly, knowing which products are going to be on discount, on sale and such, sticking to the list, just buying what you need. Don't get tempted with buying other stuff, especially in America and US, where you have all these coupons and such. Take advantage of that, as much as you can. Unfortunately, there's none of that in Argentina, so that's not an option over there. But if it is for you, then do the most of it. Take the most advantage you can from it. And finally, stocking up on the stuff you're going to be needing. I always talk about having 6-12 months worth of food. That's great. You're going to be eating it anyway. So if you have a year worth of food, it's really no difference other than maybe the price you're going to be paying. If you take the example of Argentina with 25, 30% inflation each year, you're talking about you're saving 30% compared to putting that money in a deposit account for a year in a bank that's paying you 10%, while you're saving 30% by buying ahead of time the stuff you're already going to be needing. At the same time, you already have it in case there's a disaster or an emergency of some sort where you're not able to procure food in other ways. You already have it there in place, and you're saving money, so it makes sense all the way around. And finally, I'd like to explain a little bit better how the inflation thing works. Inflation doesn't affect everyone the same. Let's say, for example, like right now in Argentina with 20% inflation in food and grocery store stuff. Everyone is going to be eating, everyone's going to be buying food in the grocery store. But it's not the same thing if you are poor, if you're middle class, or if you're rich. How is it that this works? Well, it works the following way. A poor family, a very poor family, most of its budget is going to be geared towards putting food on the table, buying food, keeping the family fed and clothed, buying clothes, buying food. So if grocery prices go up 30%, and that's almost 80% of its budget is grocery stuff, then that 20-30% is affecting 80% of his budget. On the other hand, if we're talking about middle class, maybe higher middle class family, that family is going to be eating as well, that family is going to be dressing as well, but he's going to be having other expenses. In his budget, it's going to be a smaller proportion of grocery expenses, and then he's going to be having, for example, holidays, or maybe eating in a restaurant every once in a while. That's going to be another part of his budget. Then he's going to be having stuff like more medical care expenses, especially in Argentina, where the public medical system is just awful. You just need private medical care. So that's a pretty big chunk. Private medical care, private school, same thing, very bad. So most people, most middle class in Argentina, they pay for private medical care, they pay for private school. That's a bigger part than maybe the grocery sector. So let's suppose that the 20% inflation is only in terms of grocery prices. For the poor family, that's 80% of his budget going up 20%. For a middle class family, that's maybe a smaller chunk. That's maybe, suppose, 30% of his budget, 20% going up 20-30%. It's a smaller burden on him. Now, what's happening in Argentina really is that the sector that's especially targeted is the middle class. So even though the poor sector is affected by this type of inflation, which they are, the government is really trying to take away from the middle class instead. So that's why you're going to be seeing prices of private schools, prices of medical care, of services that are more related to the expenses of the middle class going up, not just 20-30%, those are going to be going up 50% for sure in the following months. Make no mistake about that. One more thing, I don't know really how to explain this, so maybe you understand this already, or maybe you don't, but if you don't, it can be tricky to understand. Think of it this way. What you do, your job, your work, what you do is not changing in spite of this kind of stuff, with inflation, even if, no matter when inflation is taking place, your job is still the same. You're waking up at the same time, working the same amount of hours every day. Maybe you're working more than before, but that's not changing. When your work, your labor buys you and gets you less and less stuff, when the same amount of work you're doing provides you with less and less goods and services, someone is benefiting from that. Someone is taking away indirectly from you and is benefiting from that. If you look at it from this perspective, you realize that the rich sector are the ones that are being affected the least by this kind of thing. If you look at a rich person's budget, his expenses on grocery stuff and clothing and such is going to be minimum. It's going to be a very small part of his budget. Expenses of medical care and education, that sort of thing. For a rich person, that's not part of the big picture. Now, if you take, for example, a rich person that has 1,000 poor employees, if he has to pay a little bit more to each of those poor employees, that's something that's going to be affecting his budget. Because in his budget, grocery expenses is minimum. Same for some of the basic services middle class people are paying for, but he will have other costs such as paying for salaries and fees and expenses related to running maybe a big company of some sort. That's why, and this is something you've seen in America kind of recently. I was watching it recently in Fox News actually, when they were saying, they were talking about raising the minimum wage, and everyone was so pissed about that. The guys in Fox News were like, "Wow, what, raising the minimum wage?" And the commentators were, "What, raising it $1? Ah, that's insane. Why don't we raise it $1 million? Let's pay people, a guy flipping burgers, let's pay him $10,000 an hour." There's a kind of a big gap in those two, from raising $1 to paying $1 million a guy. That's really not making much sense. But you have to understand that they get worried when you even suggest something like that, because that's the equivalent of inflation for the elite. If they have to raise salaries, that's the equivalent of that's the elite's version of inflation, having to pay more of the things that really affect their budget. If they have to pay each poor employee a little bit more, that's going to be adding up, and that's going to be a chunk of his expenses, of his budget. Same for any other fees related to running and owning his company. So it's a good idea to understand how all this works. Of course, as I was talking about before, the little things, little tips on how you can save a little bit more money when inflation is putting a real dent on you. But also it's important to understand who's benefiting from it and who's getting the worst of it. So guys, as always, if you like this video, a thumbs up is really appreciated. Share it with people or others if you liked it as well. Remember to subscribe. Take care. Have a great day. See you on our next video. Bye-bye.